This Rise and Shine podcast series has been made possible by the generosity of the Zitelman Family Foundation, which is committed to the unity and continuity of the Jewish people through meaningful and relevant Jewish education and wisdom. This podcast was made possible by Eve and Sedona Cohen of Pennsylvania.
"These," he said to the priest, "these are the Jewish children." You see, the last thing a Jewish child hears at night is the Shema. It is traditionally said to them, with them, and then by them, from the cradle and indeed until the grave.
This is Rise and Shine, a podcast that offers timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations to fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note. Here is Adrienne Gold Davis.
Are you familiar with this famous story? It's one that constantly makes me weepy no matter how many times I tell it, no matter how many times I read it. It's out there in several different versions, but I want to share the way I first heard it. It's a story that reminds us that what goes in comes out when it's needed. That what we invest, the seeds that we plant, come to bear fruit where we least expect it. That planting the most wholesome and purest seeds may appear to be dormant, but they are in fact taking root even when in our lifetimes we may not see any growth. See, the thing about seeds is that in order for them to germinate, they break down, as it were. They appear to disintegrate, a kind of death. This always reminds me of that beautiful statement that made its way around the internet in the last few years, especially in Jewish circles. It said, "They tried to bury us. They did not know we are seeds." And so, the story goes like this. During the Holocaust, there were many families whom, once they understood what it meant to be transported or resettled, decided to give their babies and small children to their Christian neighbors or to the orphanages that provided a chance at the one thing their parents wanted for them, even more than their desperate need to raise them and love them. And that was the gift of life. After the war was over, Rabbi Eliezer Silver decided to head to Europe and try and find these displaced Jewish children. He would try the convents and the monasteries and the orphanages. He would seek those lost Jewish souls wherever he could find them, to reunite them with Jewish families, to be raised in accordance with their birthright. On a tip, he headed to a monastery in Eastern Europe, where he had heard from very reliable sources that many of these children might be located there. Often, when their righteous Christian neighbors feared the danger of sheltering them, they would bring them to these sanctuaries. And Rabbi Silver made the journey. Upon arrival, he spoke to the priest in charge, but he was of very little help. "Many of these children," he said, "have been here for several years. They're not going to remember their origins. We have no paperwork to support their identities. We just don't know." "Just give me 5 minutes at bedtime," Rabbi Silver asked him, "and I will know." That night, he entered the dormitory where scores of little beds lined the walls of the room. Children tucked in for the night, ready for sleep. He stood in the front of the room, and he got on a chair, and in the dark, shadowy room, he placed his right hand over his eyes, and he began to call out the Shema. "Shema Yisrael, Ad Hashem Elokeinu, Ad Hashem Echad," he cried, in the loving voice of a father to his own children. Immediately, 20 or so kids began to call out and cry, "Mama, Papa, Abba, Ima, Tati, Mommy." "These," he said to the priest, "these are the Jewish children." You see, the last thing a Jewish child hears at night is the Shema. It is traditionally said to them, with them, and then by them, from the cradle and indeed until the grave. It is a subliminal message and a mission statement. It is the bearing of witness. It is the haiku of the Jewish soul. You know, I think of this whenever I wonder where the fruits of my labors as a mother might be, whether they'll show themselves to me in my lifetime, whether these labors will be passed on to my God-willing grandchildren one day, whether my words and my messages of one God, one love, one heart will be ultimately internalized, whether my warnings of how to live a life of kindness but with appropriate boundaries will be heeded, whether the carefully instilled values I planted will take root and blossom. And I remember that I cannot control the time frame of the manifestation of my plantings, but that if I am faithful to continue planting them, that they are in there, no matter how buried or even invisible they are to my naked eye, that I planted those seeds. And as we learn in Perkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, it is not incumbent upon me to complete the task, neither am I free to desist from it. Where there is much effort, there is much reward. As a grown woman with grown children, I often hear my mother's voice come out of my mouth, for better and for worse, and I find myself understanding things she told me when I was either too disinterested or too downright defiant of them. I bring her those flowers in the form of thank yous, and sometimes of apologies for my blatant disregard for her efforts. But she doesn't gloat or say I told you so. She is just happy to get to see the wisdom she learned from her parents live on for another generation. This week, can we make a conscious decision to plant the seeds of our love and God's love in our children, whatever their ages? Can we share our deepest values, even if and when they might be met with scorn? Because they do go in, and one day those words will guide them back to us with gratitude and with renewal. May we all plant with intent and reap in joy, if not right now, then when the time is right. Because where there is much effort, there is much reward.
Thanks for listening to Rise and Shine. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Momentum Podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join Adrienne again next time for more timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations that fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note.
This podcast was sponsored by the Zitelman Family Foundation. Spread the wisdom. Inspire Jewish individuals around the globe by supporting Momentum's podcasts. To sponsor, contact podcast@momentumunlimited.org. You're listening to a Momentum podcast. For unlimited inspiration, wisdom, and empowerment, visit momentumunlimited.org.